Marty, if you don't say Leo Jenkins, I'm going to be so disappointed in you.
Who's Leo Jenkins?
Leroy Jenkins is his name.
Oh.
Yeah, Leroy.
That was the one thing that I
inspiration
really loved about Charles Bukowski is that anytime anybody asked him who his favorite poet was, he would always respond Charles Bukowski. And you're like, what an arrogant ass. But it's like, you know what? If you don't love your own work, who else is gonna?
So with the, like, you and I have talked multiple times about Vonnegut and how inspirational he has been for you within your recent works, and we've mentioned Jack Kerouac on a couple conversations earlier. What other writers have inspired you guys personally on y'all's journey to becoming writers and everything? What are some of y'all's biggest influences?
Marty, if you don't say Leo Jenkins, I'm going to be so disappointed in you.
Who's Leo Jenkins?
Leroy Jenkins is his name.
Oh.
Yeah, Leroy.
That was the one thing that I
inspiration
really loved about Charles Bukowski is that anytime anybody asked him who his favorite poet was, he would always respond Charles Bukowski. And you're like, what an arrogant ass. But it's like, you know what? If you don't love your own work, who else is gonna?
Yeah.
You know?
You gotta rep that brand.
You gotta rep the brand. Hey, by the way, I'd just like to thank Dead Reckoning Collective for having us tonight.
There you go.
Paying for these fucking brewskis over here.
That's right. That's
Denton
right.
County Brewing Company.
Yes. Little plugs here and there.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of the writers that I look up to less for their writing and more for the way they live their lives. And that's where I say I'm a big Hemingway fan. It's not necessarily that I'm a fan of his writing per se. I think that he would probably get laughed out of most publishing houses if you were to take that work today and take it in there. But again, nobody was doing what he was doing at that time, and you have to put his work into context, right? But it's really more like, hey, the way he lived his life, the way Jack Kerouac lived his life. Those are people that I just like. Oh, I want to emulate how they live their life, and if I can do that even just a little bit, then my writing's not going to be terrible.
Yeah.
But I draw from, I like that Hunter S. Thompson kind of gave people permission to make themselves a part of the story. There's more contemporary writers that I look at as far as like journalistically, like what they've been able to do.
Name drop them. Who are they right now?
I don't want to name the names off of them right now because some of them are they've got a lot of politics tied to them.
Okay, that's fine.
But there's a few.
Me a bit ago.
There's a few that have done some really excellent investigative reporting that I just I don't consider myself an investigative reporter, but I have all the respect in the world for people who do that because it genuinely takes a lot of balls to do that and put yourself out there like that. So I think that, there's a few people that come to mind on that front. But overall, though, it's, I feel really good about where I'm at, like storyteller wise, as far as like, I feel like I found my voice. I know what my voice is. I know how I write. I know my system. And I can't think there's no one or two writers that I can point to. It's more that, hey, read a lot and continue to evolve. But overall, like, I just can't think everybody that came before me, to give me those examples of like, hey, here's a few different techniques.
Well, before we go on to too much about everybody else's, I'll say it on behalf of all of you guys, and we don't have to expand on it, is the censorship culture right now that's playing out is not good for the creative craft, and the dictating of where the writing and the storytelling is going based off of the publications and the editorial review process, it is not good. And so us as Dead Reckoning, we're the pioneers of that right now. This is a plug for ourselves. This is a plug for you guys, and a plug for anybody else who wants to be a part of this. Is again, as somebody who is able to step into the character as the observer, I can see where anybody has come from in any aspect of their life, within any kind of opinion or any kind of viewpoint within life, and I think it is incredibly important for anybody to be able to be able to say that and to say it confidently and intellectually and well researched as well. And so to put these writers to make people hesitant to say these writers' names is not a good thing, and your names will be said with confidence in the future, and other writers should be said with confidence in the future, because the censorship culture in general is not good for anybody. And I'll say that, moving on to...
And I will drink to that,
yes,
my
so
friend.
cheers to that right there.
Uh-huh.
And then, but what's great is everybody in their time was probably seen as controversial, or seen as ahead of their time,
and was also battling out with
and they were probably battling it out within whatever capacity
there was some war to fight
that they were in at that time.
Yeah.
And they're visionaries, and they may not have been appreciated at their time. They may have been overly appreciated at their time, and maybe when we even look back at them now, that we see them in different type of lights. And I think it's incredibly important to call it what it is, and to call it what it's not, and to give credit when credit's due, and to maybe just say what we think about them, And I know personally, like, Vonnegut is one of my favorite authors, and C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite authors in another aspect, and they may not necessarily directly affect my writing, but it's who I like to read, and it's who I like to maybe emulate, at least within my mindset and within my lifestyle, and that lifestyle is incredibly important to play within the writer's life, in his career, in his life.
Yeah, and on that note, I forgot to add Ernie Pyle. As far as like the stuff that I do embed wise now and stuff like that in the dispatch style, I have a shit ton of respect for Ernie Pyle, and I've definitely studied the dispatches he wrote from World War II. And absolutely informs my writing today. It's not the same, but it absolutely informs it. Yeah.
And you're a big Lovecraft fan, right?
So yeah, as far as my favorite writers, definitely H.P. Lovecraft. Sort of, there's an umbilical cord, as I said earlier, for Lovecraft. You can go basically from Ambrose Bierce through Poe, through Lovecraft, and to more contemporary descendants like Brian McNaughton, Caitlin R. Kiernan, and that's on the dark fantasy side of the house. As far as military, just because we're all military, I really only have one. That's Anthony Swofford. I want to state plainly for the record, I fucking hate the military genre. That's one reason.
Except for Leo Jenkins.
Except for Leo Jenkins.
Marty,
except for everybody that you're looking at right now.
Yeah.
No, and the reason why is because it's generally extraordinarily propaganda based. Whether it's extremely anti-war, extremely pro-war, it's either we're all baby killers or re-elect George Bush, and I can't stand either. And the fact is that Anthony Swofford of Jarhead seemed to he injected such an absolute and look, there's plenty of things that you can contest about Jarhead, but the fact is when I read that in 2003, I was like this is a guy who's defying an institution. He absolutely, before Jarhead, people forget this. Before Jarhead, there was no Generation Kill, there was no Matt Best, there was no Donnie O'Malley, there was no Leo Jenkins, there was no OAF, there was nothing. It was just officialdom. And this is the way, and how to make a Marine, and and then suddenly this book comes out that talks about sex in the Philippines, and a sister who wanted to kill herself, and all this other stuff, and a sergeant that was banging a prostitute on the front of a Humvee as they busted through a gate, which is probably a lie. But the fact that was imprinted the way it was just
different versions of truth.
It exposed an element to an institution and a culture that we all know exists, and I find that very brave.
Speaking of contemporaries like Anthony Swafford, Max Uriarte, or I don't
Yeah.
know how to
From-
fucking say his last name.
Yeah, he's doing
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Terminal Lance guy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
He's another one that doesn't really fall into one of the tropes of,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, either super jingoistic or
Mm-hmm.
anti-war.
Right,
He's
right.
kind of like,
Yeah.
I got a
Absolutely,
lot of
I agree.
respect for him.
Absolutely.
That's one of the
Yeah,
reasons
yeah.
why I like David Rose's writing. It's kind of, yeah.
I was excited to get a signed David Rose book back on the Curses and Verses tour.
Yeah.
It was pretty
That was a
stoked
fun
about that.
time, man. That was a fun time.
He stopped by my house earlier, and I dropped off 4 books, and I said, "Sign them real quick before we leave."
I
can get 'em.
have just such terrible handwriting.
Yeah.
Man. I hope that can be,
I'll check.
As long as you can type.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm not a
Yeah.
writer. I'm a typer.
Yeah.
What about you over here?
Man, it's so much. I think one writer I really admire from the military side is Tobias Wolff in Pharaoh's Army. I think is maybe a perfect military memoir. I think he's known largely for A Boy's Life and for his fiction, but in Pharaoh's Army is an amazing text in terms of just being the honesty he brings to describing his experience in Vietnam is sort of startling. He's also Special Forces, so support that, I guess. But in more contemporary writing, I think writers I draw a lot of inspiration from that I really admire are Jameel Johncochi. He's an Afghan writer who has a novel out called 99 Nights in Logar. It's amazing. He's also got a short story that just came out in the New Yorker, not just, it was like last year, called Playing Metal Gear Solid 5, about this like Metal Gear Solid game set in Afghanistan, like playing that and this sort of virtual experience of the war. His work's amazing. Arya Misha is an amazing poet. She has a book called Hard Damage out right now. That's fantastic. And Karen Schofield is an Army veteran. She has a book called Battle Dress. That's fantastic. Came out now, I guess, 2 years ago. It seems like everything's just came out.
Yeah.
But her work is really astounding. She does a sort of project in the book of getting into the etymology of military terminology. So there's like a series of poems that engage with sort of the language that we use. But they're all really astounding writers. And I think that there's something to be said for reading non-veteran writers writing about the military experience,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, U.S. civilians or whether it's, civilian people. I don't know if civilians is even the right term to describe somebody who's experienced war, because it's happening in their...
I was going to say there's some really great books out there written by Iraqis and Syrians.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
are 100% worth the read.
So, when we talk about war writers, we typically mean us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that's what people mean when they say veteran writers. This is what they're thinking of. But of course, there are women veterans or veterans of color, and there are people who are experiencing war in these really myriad ways in which they have no control over or that they didn't volunteer to experience. So I think, I don't know, it's really interesting to see some of these perspectives some of this from their perspective. And yeah, I don't know. I think
No one owns the experience of war.
Yeah.
No color, no gender owns it. It affects so many people. I think the value of that experience is to bring it to those who haven't lived it, to make people understand that this is a reality, and it has been since the beginning of our tribal societies tens of thousands of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's dirty, and it's nasty, and it's disgusting, and it's painful, and
Sometimes fun.
and sometimes it's fun, and sometimes it can be, absolutely.
You show me a man that went to war and says he never had fun, and I'll show you a fucking liar.
No, and cheers to that, gentlemen.
Thank
I
you
ran
guys.
out of beer.